This coffee brewer was set to become the future of cold coffee. And what it became instead was one of modern coffee's most spectacular failures across a whole pile of different levels. It was called the Osma Pro, and it's a cold espresso maker, except it's not really an espresso maker. You know, it has this espresso portafilter inside, and it kind of operates similarly to an espresso maker, but it wasn't. It was a super modern looking brewer that was a totally new method of brewing coffee. More like a hybrid of cold espresso and, believe it or not, acoustic coffee extraction. Yes, that's right, like sound. When it launched, it got picked up by like TechCrunch and Engadget, Uncrate. It was limited to an initial run of 1,000 units at $695. Osma also sent a couple units to coffee content creators. I was one of them. And that pretty insane buzz around this thing was just the beginning, because the closer you look at it, the weirder everything gets. Basically, how you use it is you fill up the portafilter, you put your glass underneath, and there's this straw sticking out of the side, and you can either just fill your glass with water and have it suck right out of the glass and cycle through. They called that recirculation. Or you could put the straw into this other glass like this. There's a switch on the side, and when you turn it on, it pulls a shot of espresso. And what comes out is very interesting. You know, it's got this very moussey, almost like soupy nitro look. This is a very lightly roasted coffee, and the coffee is very light. And when you taste it, it's super interesting. Very interesting flavor, very interesting texture. Definitely looks and tastes and feels like a novel and new brewing method. All these air bubbles in it, almost like this Guinness coming out when you are taking a really close look at this. There's something very interesting going on here. It was designed by a guy named Joey Roth, and Joey Roth is this designer who specializes in these almost architectural looking audio systems. Really very striking products if you're into that sort of thing. And he had messed around with some coffee adjacent products before this. But the Osma Pro was something different, and it was really pitched as this device that kind of bridged the audio world and the coffee brewing world. The renders were really beautiful looking, and even though the final versions, this one is black, it also came in silver, looked, a little different from the renders, without the brass tubes coming out, they still were very striking in their own kind of brutalist, minimalist way. But the real star of the show was this new acoustic brew method. The Osma pitch was actually really cool. I don't talk about this very often on the channel, but I'm actually an audio engineer. That's my background. And as soon as I heard how this thing was designed to work, I was hooked. It was designed initially loosely around kind of this concept of something called standing waves. The Osma Pro website is shut down at this point, but if you use the Wayback Machine to kind of look back on the archive, you can actually see them describing this in kind of flowery marketing language. And basically what a standing wave is an audio wave at a fixed frequency that can kind of feed back on itself. Now, any sound wave has a actual physical length in the air. Lower tones have a longer length, and shorter sounds have a shorter length, but a higher frequency. And along the wave length, there are these kind of crests and troughs that happen at specific intervals, and you can actually measure specific distances for specific frequencies. The thinking of the Osma Pro team is that the pump would be modeled to operate at a specific frequency that, when paired with the length of the internal plumbing, would result in peak extraction right in the center of the puck. Now, if you're an audio person, you might be thinking, okay, I'm intrigued, but a couple issues with that. But I'm not even going to unpack that, because this is where things start to get pretty weird. Less than 2 months after they had put out all this material about fixed length waves and system and plumbing length and volume, the pump as a tuned point source. They totally stripped their website of any language that pointed to anything like that. And they replaced it with a totally different explanation of how the thing was supposed to work. And you can actually see this in the archive snapshots. And the new explanation of how this was supposed to work was with something called acoustic cavitation. Now, again, without getting too in the weeds on the engineering or audio or physics side of this, acoustic cavitation as a definition is actually something very specific. It can be generated in fluids by very high frequency sounds, actually in the ultrasound range. And basically it will create these little tiny bubbles in a fluid. And when you look at the coffee that comes out of an Osma Pro, you can see this Guinness-like effect in the brewed beverage that is coming out. And you can kind of be like, yeah, I can actually see that happening. And so, everyone starts throwing around this language of acoustic cavitation and new espresso extraction as they're talking about this machine, these tech publications and so on and so forth. There's just one issue with all of that. And to show you what it is, I'm actually going to open this thing up. When you actually get under the hood, you'll notice something very interesting. Inside the Osma Pro, there are exactly 0 precision audio components. Most of what's inside is actually incredibly basic. This pump was not actually modeled by the Osma team over the course of about 2 years, like some people were reporting. It's actually an off-the-shelf part by a company called XTL. You can get them for less than $100. And it's not even actually a coffee pump. It doesn't have a label on it, but it looks like a 3210, which is a pump that's actually used by drone crop sprayers, as well as in, let's say, less savory applications. No frequency controller, no advanced circuitry or sound drivers at all. And those interior lines that in the V1 of the communication were supposed to be precision spec to reinforce these fixed wavelengths are actually just made of braided silicone. Looks kind of like it was cut with an X-Acto knife. Not the best material for sound transmission. But what was really weird is that when people started getting these units and making coffee with them, there was definitely something that was happening in the cup. Now, speaking as kind of an outsider user, somebody kind of just looking in on this product, it vibrates a lot when you turn it on. And the pump is not designed for espresso machines. It's got this kind of jittery sound and feel and kind of vibrates everything. The pump is not going to be generating infrasound capable waves, at least at not a primary resonant frequency. So as far as strict definitions go, acoustic cavitation is kind of ruled out as a primary extraction method for me. I think just the simple pure vibration of that water going through the lines, combined with the fast flow rate, combined with espresso degassing, combines to somehow create that nitro style look. But it seems to me more like a secondary outcome rather than something that was designed in from the very beginning. It was also designed initially to recirculate coffee. So you would put your coffee here and then came with a couple different straws. You would put the straw in your glass, and it was designed to kind of keep recirculating the coffee through in order to achieve higher levels of extraction. Well, when people got these and they realized, number one, that's pretty gross. I'm running actually brewed coffee through my pump and there's no way really to clean it out. And besides that, it doesn't actually work very well. Osma also kind of stopped communicating about doing that, and everything kind of shifted towards using this kind of second glass application. All of that weirdness around the internal components, the changing communication about the core principles that caused the Osma to work the way it did, I think all of that could actually have been forgiven if it weren't for what came next. In the end, a ton of people ordered these things and they sold out of their first 1,000 units extremely quickly. Osma Pros started to ship in like these small, sort of seemingly random batches. And when they started landing with actual users, people kind of found that they were actually pretty hard to use. They were consistently very messy. They would tend to spray a lot. all over your counter. They behaved very strangely in comparison to traditional espresso machines. It'd be very common to like gush coffee very quickly and very messy at the beginning and then slow down and stall out towards the end of the extraction. So you could end up like turning it off for a bit and letting it sit and then trying to finish later. You had people trying to do like these manual 2-second pre-infusions with the button. I found that some of that gushing and then stalling was a lot more prevalent with high fines grinders that produce a lot of little dusty particles. It tended to perform a lot better with very unimodal grinders. And I think that actually points to the fact that it's just pure vibration causing the fines in the puck to migrate during the extraction and then clog the brew when using those types of grinders. But still, people grabbed onto it. They would try and do all these interesting things. They would get pretty forgiving, really, and tasty results in the cup, and they were having a lot of fun while they were doing it. Then something really crazy started to happen. The shipments of Osma Pros got increasingly disorganized and slow. When they launched, you could even reserve your own serial number. It's actually CNC'd right into the top of the machine. This one is number 944. And what would happen is people would get a machine that had a serial number. They were supposed to be later in the production queue, but the people who were supposed to get theirs first hadn't gotten theirs yet. And so you had a lot of people in Osma's private Discord server who were kind of voicing their frustration with like, I was supposed to get my machine and I backed early and I haven't gotten it yet. Then you would get people who actually received either the wrong color or the wrong machine entirely, missed delivery dates, and people who had jumped in on this project early were getting more and more upset with the Osma team. And at first, the Osma team was really jumping on a lot of these requests and a lot of these complaints, very apologetic, but eventually the communication became less clear, slowed, and then eventually totally stopped. And then nobody was really sure what was happening. Months went on and words like vaporware started getting thrown around, but there were real units in the wild. And the whole time people are getting more and more frustrated. And then one day, a behind the scenes investor, somebody who had helped get this project off the ground from a financial standpoint very early on, jumps into this Discord server and basically announces that the project has been a complete failure operationally, and they're selling off the assets. And today, Osma is still shut down. The website is a landing page placeholder, and there are a handful of people out there who still have their units, can make pretty interesting coffee on them that is based in somewhat sketchy science. And there's been some technology advancements in the world of espresso since the Osma Pro was announced, like high flow baskets are a thing now, and that produces a little bit more favorable result on an Osma. Throwing a paper filter in the bottom kind of helps with the mess a little, which is kind of cool, but you still can't get one, so does it even really matter? The crazy part for me is when you compare the beginning of the Osma saga to the end. Somebody tried something, got a really cool result, and tried building a product around that they could deliver to more people. Now, somebody may have wrapped that up in some kind of abstract ideas that may or may not have been based in actual reality of what was going on in the cup, but it was very cool and interesting. I think the cautionary tale for all of us in this is that all of these big publications picked this machine up. There was press releases put out and it looks very cool and it's very flashy, and they're all parroting this language of how the machine works, standing wave resonant harmonics and acoustic cavitation and totally new brewing method. And on the inside, there actually aren't any novel components. It is a drone crop sprayer pump, basically with a portafilter attached. And these articles are going out to a lot of different people without really any kind of real measure of due diligence, which is kind of freaky as a consumer. And I think is a good lesson for all of us to take the things that we see and read out there on the internet or in YouTube videos like this with a grain of salt. Now, fortunately, the Osma produces a tasty, interesting cup. So I'm going to continue to enjoy mine while I have it. But I want to know what you think about this whole thing. What happened with the Osma is fascinating. Was it malicious? I don't know. What's your take on the whole deal? Do you think somebody had a vision that they couldn't actually execute on? Do you think it's a design failure? Do you think it's a PR failure? I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Osma Pro and its saga in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you on the next one.